Hi, good evening all. Uh, I'm Gayan, and today we are going to talk about objects, basically object fundamentals. So let's move on. So data types in JavaScript. I think you have already covered this in the second session. So basically there are two types. We can divide into two types like primitives and non-primitives. So all the data types are primitives except the object. So I'm not going to describe detail about this. So we have already covered this. And those are the built-in objects in JavaScript. So now you may have a question like a string, number, and boolean is already here. So uh, what it does is the those string, number, and boolean are equivalent to those primitive values as well. So, and other than that, object, function, array, date, regex, and array are also object types. So, what is an object? So, object is basically a collection of properties, and a property is a key value pair. So you can uh, define there are basically defined predefined objects, and also you can define your own objects, and you can give functions to property values as well. In that case we call that those are methods. And for example, we can compare uh, objects are similar to like uh, uh, our real world objects. So in that case, if we take this as an example, so dog is an object, so with properties. So we can say a dog has a color, age, gender, and etc. So likewise, the same way JavaScript objects can have properties which define their characteristics. And objects and properties. But like I mentioned earlier, property is a key value pair. So you can give a, you define a key when you're defining an object, so that would be a string, and also you can give values, so that can be anything. And yeah, property is a define a characteristic of object. And if you're going to access a property, you can simply uh, access those properties by values like using documentation. And this is a basic object creation. So in later we will see how to create objects in a proper way. So here I have created a micro object, and I have given those three properties. And object name and property names are case sensitive. So if you it gives a undefined array if you're trying to access a key that is not defined. So same thing happened here. So if you are trying to access a undefined keys, so it will give undefined. And also you can assign and access object properties by using bracket notation. So likewise, within brackets, you can simply define your key, and you can assign a value for that. So in that case, objects are kind of called like associative arrays. and object accessors. In ECMAScript 5, it includes the getters and setters. So, like in other languages, you can define the getters and setters, which means getter is a method that gets the value, and setter is something you can set a method that you can set values.
And up to now, you might be confused by all objects because normally in all the other languages we talk about classes, right? We have classes and we instantiate whatever the say if it is a person class, we create instance out of it and call whatever the methods or access properties. But in this case, it's a bit different. In JavaScript, we have objects for everything. It's kind of like object driven, and we have classes as well, but it's all object driven. You can simply create an object literal and define set of properties and set of functions as well over there, objects whatever the methods, and you can use all those then and there. You don't have to create a class directly and afterwards create an instance out of it and use it.
And another thing I want to mention here, like we are using get and set here. So those are not the names that is used for getters and setters. So like in the right side code snippet, you can see object.reset calling the getter method, and object.add will assign a 5 to that setter method. So likewise, get and set are not part of function names. So like the reset, increment, decrement are the getters and setters name. And object.define property. This is a method that comes in JavaScript to it gives the capability for you to add new property directly for an object, and or you can modify the existing properties. So in the example, it says we have added the object 1, that's the object, and property 1 is the property, and we have assigned a value 42 for that, and we have disabled the writable access. So in line number 8, it tries to change the value of the property 1, but it throws an error. So, and it doesn't change the value of the property 1. So likewise, you can define your own define properties here, like a set of descriptors.
And this particular function is really important because with this you can create a property within an object saying it's not enumerable. In that case, if you iterate through the objects, whatever the case, it won't come to that iterator. So it will be ignored. And again, writable is one other good example, and configurable is there. Likewise, there are several properties which you can use here whenever you are defining a property. But if you directly create a property, if you create a literal and set a property, it will be writable, configurable, and enumerable. So all true. In case if you don't specify any of those over here, if you want to disable anything, you have to use this object.define property method. And this object class, it is the parent object class. So in JavaScript root level you have object class, and there you have all this defined property and whatever the methods. There are several helper methods available in object class, and this is one of them, one most important method.
So those are the ways of creating objects. So like we can use object initializers, and we can use constructor function and object create method, and also in ES6 we have classes. So let's take a one by one. So the first one is using object initializers. So in this way we can create an object by using object literals. So the literals are those curly brackets here. So within that you can give key value pairs like string or number, and so yeah, in this way also, this is a one method to create an object.
And if you go back to that previous slide, here did you notice that property names of a particular object can have spaces? Whatever the valid string, if you have a valid string, whatever it contains, if it is an empty string, a set of spaces or whatever, it is valid for a object key. And again, when you have a number there, what happens is internally JavaScript engine will convert it to a string. So within the object, it represents this particular number as a string. And again, even if you pass another object or whatever the type thing over here, as long as it is convertible to string, it will do that and have the property name as a string.
So here we have code snippet like it tries to convert the object to a string. So in this case, what would be the output of this?
So basically, what we are trying to do here is we are calling object.toString, right? But we haven't defined any toString method over here. So what do you think is the output? Will it work? Throw an error? Undefined? Okay. What else? Any other ideas? Yeah.
Print the object blueprint, I mean the first name and
Okay. Any other answers? So you all think that it can be undefined or the actual objects, whatever the things which it has, like all those properties. That's it. Okay. All of you are wrong. So it will output object. This is a string. In a string code, it will return this, so it will get logged to the console.
So yeah, so now you have a question like, so what it why it defines like object. So why it can't be just object?
And again, the main question is, where did this toString come from? Because in this object we don't have a toString method, right?
So it gives like a object because we have several kinds of object types, right? So if when you're trying to convert it to convert function into a string, so it will give object function. So likewise object array. So because of that, it gives object. So object, you can see object, all objects are inherited from the parent object. So here you can see the object we have created earlier. So you can see the first name and last name, and from where those other methods come from. So those come from the object, parent object, I mean. So it inherits all the objects we are creating from the parent object.
So in the object literal, whenever you are creating a literal with that particular syntax, ideally what happens is underneath it uses the object construct anyway. We have this syntax for object literal, but underneath it uses object constructor and creates the object, and that particular object inherits the object parent class. So whatever the object you create inherits from object class. Like in Java, whenever you create a class, it inherits from object, right? So likewise, same thing happens here. And here you can simply override it.
So here we have override the toString method, and it gives the output like console unban. And this is another method like to how to create a very object. So this is a constructor function. So there are, we can follow 2 steps to create an object here. So you can see in the first step, so it will create a function called person, and it passes the 2 values, and we have defined first name and last name as the property keys there. So you now have a question like, what is this here? So just consider this for now, this as an object here, because we have a separate session to cover this keyword, so it will behave as an object here. So just take it as that, and you can see in the line number 6 we have added the print function to the person.prototype. So once we create an object by using a keyword, so we can also access the function that is there in the prototype. That means print method is person object inherits the print one, so we can access the print every object that we are creating here, every person objects. So
let me explain a bit further this particular example. So consider this as a class in whatever the language you use. In Java, you have class keyword, right? And you create a class with a class name, and you have a set of methods and set of properties. In this case, the set of properties are first name and last name. So that is how you define whatever the class level properties. You have first name, class name, and you have to say this dot first name to specify a class level property. So ideally, what will happen is it will create a class level variable. So we have 2 variables there, class level properties, and we have one function called print, and print is in prototype. So prototype is a special object within whatever the class. So here we have a constructor function. So this particular function, when you look at it, it has this dot first name, right, and this dot last name. So whenever you declare a function, whenever you create a function, you can new up a function. In JavaScript, if you create a function and if you call new function name, it will create an instance out of that particular function. And that is how you create classes in JavaScript before ECMAScript 6. So whatever the function, if you have a ABC function with nothing on it, say one console log is there, and if you try to new up the ABC function, it will create an instance out of it, and it won't have any properties there. It will just new up and create an instance out of that particular function for you, and you might see it as no point, right? Because normally what we do is we call the function and get the values. But in this case, if you want to create an instance out of a particular class and use it, then you have to use, leverage the same function syntax, but in the function context, you have to access this dot, whatever the property names, you have to declare property names like that, and you have to assign the values if you have anything which you want to accept from the constructor and assign it over there. And you have to declare all your whatever the functions within the prototype. And the prototype is kind of like something which is provided by the function. If you think deep, function again is object. So that is a bit confusing. Instead of all the primitive types, everything else is inheriting object, and all of those are created from objects, and function itself is an object, and it has a property called prototype, and that prototype property is kind of special, where you can put all the functions which you want to use within that person or whatever the class you are creating, that should come there. So ideally what happens is, when you new it up, when you say new person with whatever the name, in this case Kusal Mendis, it will get assigned to those variables over there and create a new instance. So that class is there, nothing will happen to that class. It won't have any memory references to Kusal or Mendis or whatsoever. It is the blueprint, and this will create an instance out of that person class and have those two properties, first name and last name, and it will have a reference to print function. It doesn't copy the print function. So what happens is, it will create an instance out of that person class, and it will keep a reference to that function, because all these objects, whatever the objects you create, are reference types, and you have one memory reference to a particular function whenever you create a function, and you can point to that and call it. Because what happens here is, whenever you create object, if you keep on copying this particular function, say if you want to create 1,000 objects out of this in a loop or something, then it will create 1,000 copies of this function, right? So that is what's going to happen if you have this particular function within the construct itself, saying this dot print equals function whatever the function body. Then it will create 1,000 instances, 1,000 reference, not actual references, 1,000 individual functions whenever you are creating this particular instance out of this particular constructor class. But in this case, it will have only one print function, and all the instances created out of this particular class will reference to that same function. So that is the benefit of having prototype, and we will explain all the details of prototype and how it works and how to do inheritance with these and so on and so forth in a later session. But for now, remember it as a special object, and you have to use it in these kind of scenarios where you want to create a method within a particular class. And function is leveraged to create classes in JavaScript. Any questions? I thought it's confusing. When I first heard this, I was like, oh, okay, that's confusing. All right.
So prototypable inheritance. So this is what Hans said earlier. So object inherit properties and methods from the prototype. So date objects inherit from the date prototype, and arrays from array prototype. And the object prototype is the top prototype inheritance, top end of the prototype inheritance chain. And yeah, date objects, array objects, and person object inherits from object.prototype.
And the nice thing in JavaScript is, natively we have date, right? Array is there, and so many other readily available constructor functions and objects are available in JavaScript. For an instance, array, you can create array literal, or else you can use the array construct and create array. That's simple syntax, right? You just use two square braces and put whatever the numbers or whatever the things you want to put in array, and you can call whatever the methods which are available in the array. So if I give you an example, array has a method called sort. So you can call sort method on top of whatever the created array reference. You can use a array literal and create array, and afterwards call that sort function, right? That is simple syntax. Say in case if you want to introduce a new array function like array.unique to get all the unique values of a particular array. Then in Java or any other language, C# or whatever the language, what would you do? Like, can anybody answer? Like in Java, how you're gonna address it? Leon? Yeah. We extend it and create a child class. That is how, right? So in JavaScript, it's a bit different. Reflection is out of the box available. So what you can do is, this array class, you can mutate it. You can simply add a new prototype method to array class saying array.prototype.say unique, and you can assign a function and it can do the magic of, I don't know, getting all these unique values and returning them. So that is a really powerful feature in JavaScript. Anything, date, array, or whatever the type you have, whatever the non-primitive type you have, you can simply add new behaviors, override the existing behaviors, or mutate anything. So in case if you want to say change the sort function of the array, inbuilt one, and change it to a different one, say array sorting mechanism, you don't like the way it works, you have to set a function as argument and you have to compare A and B. You have to write some logic there, but in case if you want to simply do string comparison there, so you can simply override it. Likewise, you can override anything. As it is powerful, it is dangerous as well. In case if you replace the whole array, it won't be available next up after that particular line. So you can destroy everything and you can use it as a really powerful feature and make use of it to ease up your work. You can write all those utility functions and nice things within all those whatever the readily available classes within JavaScript. And that same concept applies for custom classes as well. There also you have a prototype and you can mutate whatever the things you have defined there. Say a third-party library is there. This is a real use case in all those production applications you are building. So you get a library and that library doesn't have some feature, or that particular library has a bug. And you have no way of fixing it within the library, and say it is not maintained at all right now, then you can simply get the set of functions or whatever the particular function which has a bug, and you can simply fix it and override it.
Yes. Next, we have another method to create objects. So this is object.create method. So it allows you to pass an existing object to create an object. So in this code snippet, you can see I have used I have passed animal object to create animal1 object. So, and in the explanation,
can you go back to that same slide? If you have noticed here in the object literal, earlier we had prototype, right? I explained that there is something called prototype. You can use a constructor function and do that. That is one way of creating object where you use you create a class and create instance of it. This is the direct way where you create an object literal and you define all those properties. And then there, if you notice, what we have is we have a type property which has a value of dog, which is a string, and the display type which is a function, and it is referring to that type value with this keyword. So likewise, in object literals, you can have functions as well, but if you directly call animal.displayType, it will look undefined. The reason is this particular object literal doesn't have display type within its prototype, and it doesn't have a reference to this keyword. So ideally in Chrome or Firefox or whatever the browser, if you try to do this, what will happen is it will try to access this type in type property in Windows, because in browser context, in the global scope, when you try to run this keyword refers to window. So window.type might not be available. If it is available, it will log that variable, but it won't refer to the type property in animal. So to make use of this syntax and create an instance out of it, this again is an object, which is a little confusing again, and you have to create an instance out of it to use it. In this case, because in this case, because you are using a function notation uh, within that literal, and this object.create will create a prototype and do its magic to set the prototype correctly, and it will refer to itself whenever we are referring to this when if you call animal.displayType. So if you above lines, say in line number 7, if you call animal.displayType, it will log undefined, but in line number 10, if you call displayType, it will log dog. Hope you all got the idea. And this is really powerful, and the actual usage is not this. Object create can be used for prototypal inheritance. In the next session, we will cover that. But you have to get a clear idea of object create, because this is heavily used, this one, and define property.
Yes, the explanation, it says the object.create method creates a new object using an existing object as the prototype of the newly created object. So I have modified the previous example. So here you can see in line number 10, I have added a new property. I have added the type property to the animal1 object, and in line number 2, I'm going to delete that animal1.type. So now you have a idea about the prototypes as well. So can you tell me what would be the answer for these, like animal1.displayType? So what would be the output for that?
Any guesses if you don't know the answer? Undefined? By the way, this delete is valid syntax. That is how you delete a property or a variable. Any guesses? No?
No.
Yeah, you are correct. So what happens is when you delete the type property over here, it refers back to the parent object type property. This is kind of like an inheritance hierarchy. We call it prototype chain. You have a child object, and child object is referring to a parent object. Parent object is animal. That parent is referring to the object, root object, which is the kind of like the God class of everything. So that is object, and that is the hierarchy of references. And once you delete the self-containing property, it will refer back to the parent. So that is why you are getting that.
So this is the final one. So in ES6 specification, so it provides a way to create objects by using classes. So in that case, it replaced the constructor function method. So in here, so this is pretty much familiar to all of you, right? So in other languages, uh, the same where you are creating classes and likewise. So we have a separate session for classes as well, so I'm not going to describe that in here.
And one small thing, this class syntax is really nice. You have to learn it, and we will cover it anyway. And now you might be thinking, why did we even cover that function, construct, objects, and all those weird syntax? And do we really have to learn those? Uh, yes, actually, you have to learn because underneath, whenever you create a class with this particular class syntax, or it again uses prototypal inheritance, prototype level details. So unless you know the fundamentals, unless you know how everything works underneath, how prototype works, no point of learning this. This is kind of like a synthetic sugar where you have nice syntax to write everything, but underneath it happens that way, what I explained. So that is what we are going to learn first, and afterwards we are going to come to this. But if you want to use reflection kind of features, which I explained earlier on, you have to have a proper understanding of prototype. And again, if you want to mutate certain things over here in this particular class, then again you have to have a really good understanding of how these things work. And class again have extends keywords and so on. This is supported in most of the like latest browsers, but still we use prototype and all those old syntax. In certain cases, we must use them. So you have to have a really good understanding of this and class.
Yes, that's all about the fundamentals of objects. So I have linked some references that I have used here. And what next is the advanced objects by advanced. So
In this session, we will cover all the details of how objects work. I mean, prototype level details, how to iterate through object properties, and object comparison, how memory references are created when you create objects, and how all those references are passed between functions, and how you refer back, and again what all best practices are there when it comes to objects. And uh, one important thing is, if you don't really understand objects, it's really hard to work in JavaScript, because everywhere, whatever the thing you do, it's all objects, right? So try to participate to that session and have a really good, clear understanding of how these things works. And again, reference links. We cover few things in a particular session. We won't be able to cover all the details, right? And we have put all the reference links. And I think it's best if every one of you can go through all of those links and read, because we can explain things, but sometimes when you read, you get more. And again, try to read books, all those. There are various ways you can learn. MBN is a really nice source, so try to read and understand. And again, if you have any doubts or questions regarding these things, they are confusing at times. So uh, get to us. Like you can post your whatever the question, we will answer. And if you have any immediate questions, we'll be able to answer.